Wayne Finck enters the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame tonight as a builder, but this Halifax man, known in local lacrosse circles as the godfather of lacrosse, could enter as an athlete for a stellar playing career he had through the 60s and 70s. He was good enough right away to be part of the province's Canada Games team, playing in the inaugural Summer Games in Halifax. He was on the provincial team at Junior B Nationals in 1970 and 1971, and then played senior lacrosse for the province in 1973. The first of his 9 appearances at Nationals. Twice, he won All-Star honors.
Gary Bottomley, and I go back to 1968 with Wayne when we both started our playing of the game of lacrosse. Wayne played with the junior team, that was our opponent. I played with the Colonels, he played with the Generals. There were 2 other teams in the league, and we continued to play for the next, 40 years.
Julie Finck, Wayne's daughter. My lacrosse experience with him includes him coaching me as a kid, coaching with him as an adult, and we had the pleasure of being able to teach together and work on many executives and lacrosse volunteering pieces together. Probably the highlight being taking Nova Scotia girls teams to female nationals in 2011, 12, and 13.
Mike Hayes. I was just a dad, and I met Mr. Finck, who was a school teacher at Rockingham Elementary. He recruited my boys to play after school, and then the rest happened. I went on to become president of the Northwest Lacrosse Association, which encompassed Rockingham School. I went on to become president of Lacrosse Nova Scotia, commissioner of the Nova Scotia Field Lacrosse League, and a whole bunch of other coaching roles, all because of Wayne.
He grew up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and was introduced to the game in the lead up to the 1969 Canada Games that was being held in Halifax, and began playing, fell in love with lacrosse, and quickly wanted to take the game further. So he ended up trying out for the Montreal Québécois.
Only 6 years after he took up the game that many professionals had been playing since they were youngsters, he joined the Montreal Québécois of the National Lacrosse League, scoring 41 points in 37 games, another 20 in 13 playoff games.
And the coach there, his first year trying out, I think, sent him to Coquitlam Adnak, and so he played in BC for a year, sort of as a prep to play the game at a little faster pace and a higher level, and went back and was able to make the Montreal Québécois the year after in 75, and played 1 season before it was folded.
Mike Lalonde, who's been involved in lacrosse with Wayne for much of the last decade, says his good friends started playing the game in the late 1960s.
He would have been 17 or so, and for a lacrosse player, that's, you're getting up in years there. Today they start when you're 6, 7 years old. I think the really tremendous accomplishment of him as a player was that within 5 years of him starting, he was playing professional lacrosse. And that's a major accomplishment in any sport, to be playing such a short period of time and then reach professional status.
This is his jersey from Montreal, and the player's contract, which we were just, saying that it was a dream come true for him to have played. And he was pretty heartbroken after a year when the league folded, and he only got 1 season in, and to come back to Halifax and continue to play senior was pretty devastating for him. But it really was the highlight of his playing career, and he didn't keep a lot, so the things that he did keep, I know, were important to him. So the only jersey he's kept. So, and then came back to Nova Scotia, and then spent some years, became a physical education teacher and taught in Quebec City for 4 years. And also played in Alberta one summer as well. And then in the early 80s returned to Nova Scotia and stayed here the rest of his career.
Who introduced Wayne specifically to the game, and talk about what you know about his very early years, maybe the first 4 or 5 years after being introduced to the game, what was happening in Nova Scotia with Wayne at that time?
Well, Wayne was just one of the players that came out to a gathering of anyone interested in playing the game of lacrosse that was set up by Garnet Knight. And from the group of players that came out to an evening get-together and kind of introduction to the game, a league formed with 4 teams, and Wayne played on the Generals. I actually played on an opposing team, the Colonels, and there were 2 other teams in the league, the Raiders and the Commanders. And it went from there. That year, Wayne ended up on the Canada Games team as a pickup, and then through the rest of the years, Julie mentioned his pro stuff. We played against each other and then played with each other throughout the years, into the 90s. So Wayne was pretty much the influence of himself. Like he was a pinnacle player. And so I don't think he was looking at me to change his game in any way. He was his own player. Gained a great deal of experience from the Quebecois, which of course helped him in his further endeavors playing with teams here in Nova Scotia or even in Alberta. We played together in Alberta as well. So I would think the Quebecois experience was probably his highlight. He was a prolific scorer in the junior and senior leagues, so they would have been highlights to him. But Wayne wouldn't want to talk about those. He was a very modest person. We had success out in Alberta. I think Wayne, if anything, he would want to talk about his contribution to the game through coaching and organization and recruiting people to support what was going on in the province at the time. So.
Okay. Who are the people that you recall or aware of that were around him or part of that team? Any other lacrosse legends or icons that were part of the Quebecois team that
Yeah, Johnny Davis was a key player at that team. There was a player who came out of the Quebec leagues, Serge Loisel, I believe, also played. I don't recall a lot of players from that team. Ernie Mitchell was a goaltender. He was a high-quality goaltender. They would have been, key people that Wayne would have been associated with.
And the coaches of that
It was a Bishop, Jimmy Bishop.
Okay. I have a quote here I just want to read. You mentioned John Davis.
Yeah.
He said, "I've met a lot of players in my life, but none compare to Wayne as far as fitness goes.
Yeah.
If I had a team, I'd want every player to be like Wayne. He was not only a great teammate and friend, but he was also a great asset to the game of lacrosse." So those are nice, obviously nice words from John Davis. But
I think anything he did 110%, and he took the fitness piece to a whole nother level. From the stories that I hear, I think part of the story here is what Gary touched on a few minutes ago, that he was quite modest, and it's I try to talk to my brother, talk to my mom, my uncle, and get some more of the pieces put together, but it was really difficult to really know what his career entailed. I think I was a teenager before I knew that he played professional lacrosse. And it wasn't until Mike Laloon asked me to work on the Hall of Fame for Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame application that I actually sat down and interviewed him. And it was like pulling teeth to get like what accomplishments, where did you play, what is the timeline here, and never once did he really tell me, like it was more factual. But then when I went and talked to my uncle, I was shocked to hear that not only was he a goal scorer, but he was actually drop the gloves and fight shocked me. But when I then said that to someone shocking, they were like, "Oh yeah, of course." Like he was tenacious, and that his personality and persona that I knew of him is he turns into almost a different person when he hits the floor. So you continue.
Well, Julie was telling me one time about Wayne's journey with golf.
Oh God.
I can tell you that too.
And I didn't understand it. I just said, should I get out golfing with him? She goes, no. And it was so like, you don't understand. My dad is so competitive that game is sort of really beating him up, and he just, he can't play at the sort of the level that he wants to. And so I always remember that. And I got to see his competitiveness on display at a Masters tournament in Newfoundland about 10 years ago. And he must have been early 60s at the time, fit as a fiddle. He used to drive his bike to work or to school every day. He used to run. He was lean and limber, and he made us look, average on the floor. But we played about maybe 3 minutes in the start of our first game. And, guys were walking back on defense and everything else. And he took the whole team to task. And he was so visibly upset. He was shaking and stuttering, telling people to get up the floor and to play hard or get on the bench. And that's the first time I had really seen it.
Seen that side?
That for me. And then I saw it later when he was checking 14-year-old girls in the gym, trying to teach them how to take a check.
Yeah, Wayne's ability to check was renowned. He was a defensive specialist, aside from being also, a very talented scorer. Dealing with the fitness element, when we were both going to go to the camp in Quebec, I went to Quebec City, he went to Montreal. Haas Watson went to Montreal with him, a goaltender from down here. But Wayne was, at that time, taking physical education at Dal. And the Dal Arena had a place, you could run around the top of the Dal Arena. It was an old wooden roofed building. And when I was, I met up with Wayne, he said, well, we're going to train to get ready for this, these camps that we're going to. And he had it all charted out. Wayne was meticulous about charting everything out. He had his workout all charted out, minute by minute, how many reps, how many miles he was going to run, how many sprints he was going to do. And I was always in pretty good shape, and came through the Canada Games program in '73, and, that was intensive training. But I got tied up with Wayne, and many days I'd never be able to stay with him. There was just no chance. And so anyway, but we'd practice in the gym with full gear on, checking and catching and what have you. And he'd say, okay, let's do some one-on-one drills. And then he'd get in his crouch. And he'd always tap you up a few, right? Just to get you feeling what he's going to come with. And then he'd, get you position and push you out of the way or what have you. But there wasn't too much Wayne didn't do that he didn't put his full heart into. And it wasn't so much competitive towards other people. It was competitiveness towards himself, because he always wanted to be that little bit better. He'd challenge himself, on anything, any aspect of the game. But fitness was a key factor.
I mean, picking up on the toughness issue too, is one of the qualities of his game, which I find interesting, because you as we've talked about his intensity, and then you counteract that with the nature of his profession.
Yeah, he's a phys ed teacher for elementary, primary or kindergarten to grade 6 level, and introduced lacrosse along with many other sports to a wonderful school community that he was at Rockingham, and I got the pleasure to job share with him. So we worked together alongside and got to run intramurals with him, and it was very early in my career. So it was really my he was my mentor, and the ability he had to connect with a full range of kids, no matter athletic ability, and wherever a kid was, and just trying to instill healthy lifestyles and enjoyment for sport, enjoyment for activity was there, and patience and putting on programming of all sorts, and but he always offered recess lacrosse for the kids that wanted to come in and run them through drills, and there was a great group of kids over a number of years that took him up on that offer and spent a lot of time in the gym. And if anyone was interested in putting a lacrosse stick in their hands, he was there. There was no need for him to have a recess break or a lunch break. And just, a lot of patience and a lot of encouragement and smile. And I think he did a pretty good job at the elementary level of hiding his competitiveness. But having been to a couple of elementary school track and field meets, on the inside, his team did well, and he was pumped about that. and some great athletes came out of that school that are professional hockey players, and the Barron brothers. There's a number of really great athletes, but they did really well. And on the inside, he was going, "You see that? You see that?"
Yeah.
But it was kind of masked. Yeah.
Yeah, like I hold Wayne up so high as like a coach facilitator, because I did my first introductory course with him. But what I always sort of noticed with him was the school teacher side of him, is that he understood about keeping everyone active. He understood about breaking the floor. And I remember we had 50 kids in a gymnasium, mayhem, and yet he had order and structure, and he had all the kids that were helping out. It was like, this is what you need to do. He had everybody in place. And I always remember sort of, that was a great thing for me to learn about, just that sort of that overall sort of view of what was going on. And I put it down to sort of, teaching kids and everything else. It brought a different level of awareness to coaching, which is kind of funny because coaching competitive and competition and sort of like maximum performance. And then yet there was this other part of it that certainly at the community development level and introducing people to the sport, it was really, really important, and made him such a great mentor that way.
Yeah, the awareness of wait time in lines was a huge thing for him, so that your drills and your practice, and no matter how many kids are there, that there's a little bit of downtime between your activity, but no more than 2 or 3 kids ahead in line, because then kids find other things to do, or bored or distracted. So he was very aware and very on top of keeping a good flow of activity that allowed not only for kids to stay focused and have fun, but also that management piece was huge.
Yeah, utilizing their development time. So when the drills were running, they weren't standing still, they were actually engaged. So
Also I think he was involved nationally with some of the development programs with the CLA as well.
he worked on the coaching certification, level 1, level 2, I believe, with Bill McBain. And I believe he might have done some of that even with officiating, because he spent a lot of time in the 90s officiating, late 80s and 90s officiating. So it might have been, that might have been his connection to the CLA.
Okay.
It's kind of strange to hear my story repeated by other people about showing up at the gymnasium and sort of showing a little bit of interest and being brought in, and that's more about Wayne as the recruiter. But, at the time, sort of, I was a hockey coach, and then I went to the gym and they were playing lacrosse. Well, I played lacrosse as a kid, and it kind of almost disappeared. So it was like this little moment of joy sitting up on the stage at Rockingham School. And it's like, I don't really know much, but I really want to get involved, and yet I don't know what to do. And so he must have seen the look on my face, and he pulled me over. And I remember going through the first clinic. He had a trash can full of lacrosse sticks, and you pulled one out and we went around. And one of the things he taught, which I thought was amazing. And again, I got through the same thing with hockey. I'm not much of a hockey player, but I get on the ice to help out and move pucks around and everything else. But at that time, lacrosse, you were going to be a head coach. And so he taught us these little tricks about how you could look good doing drills without having to have all the skills. And I thought, this is brilliant.
I hope that's not the way he made the Quebec wall.
And
I doubt it. He had skills.
But it was just little things that you would do, or how to involve some of the better players in some of the demonstrations, and just little tricks that sort of really help, and sort of so you didn't feel out of place yourself with kids that might have been a bit more dexterity and obviously some skill. So it was quite. He had a lot of tricks.
I guess I'd like to ask you, Julie, a little bit, pick up on something you mentioned earlier. One of the areas you put a lot of emphasis on and developed was the female side of the game.
So he, along with 3 others, started the Metro Minor Lacrosse League in either the late 90s or about 2000. And I think at the time the NLL was starting to play on TV and the game was getting a bit more traction. And I remember him saying, we've been kind of just at this just keeping it alive level for a long time. We're either going to make something of this or stop. And so they created the MMLL, and it jumped from a very few number of lacrosse players into a full-blown league, and they really had a lot of success. At that time I was away at university. I think there was a lot of beginning efforts going into building the Metro League in Halifax and surrounding areas. And at some point, my aunt Christine came on as the female coordinator, and they had a girls-only league for junior high and high school aged girls. And at some point, I came back from university, and I had played women's field lacrosse in Ontario, and I sort of started to get involved. I think my aunt and my dad offered or proposed that I become the secretary of the Metro Minor League. And I said, well, you're going to buy me a tea. And so for years after, I got my tea purchased on the way to the meetings, and started in a small role and ended up moving over into focusing more on the girls' side with my aunt and my dad, and we were able to establish divisions at all of the age groups to match the CLA and the men's side of the game. And then he supported me and a few others with developing a women's field program, which we joined Mike and the men's or boys Nova Scotia Field Lacrosse League. But I think the real highlight was starting. My dad and I were able to start with taking provincial teams to nationals, and that's when the girls program really elevated in Nova Scotia. So our first team was a joint effort with New Brunswick, and we went to nationals in Vancouver. We played in New Westminster on the wooden floor, which is a pretty amazing experience, and really getting the group at Bantam and following them up. But that group was sort of the start of real skill level for the girls program in Nova Scotia, and at the time we were one of 4 teams along with New Brunswick, but with Alberta, BC, and Ontario, and we've really held our own and improved since then.
And I think was he also the impetus around a national championship for adding another level?
Yes. Nova Scotia hosted female nationals in 2014. And after going, I think we went 2011, 2012, 2013, BC, Ontario, we finally were the host. And the previous years it was for bantam and midget only. And so when we were hosting in Nova Scotia, he felt like, this is the time, we're in control, here we go, and had a junior division, which did last for a few years. And I think they're bringing it back this year, but there were some years that it didn't happen. But junior nationals for the first time was in Halifax.
Do you care to share any details around the print and what stories that? I think it ties into Jim Bishop, does it?
It does. Well, yeah, I don't actually know how he selected it, but I do know that this has been in my parents' house for and framed and probably the only real piece of artwork in the house. Jim Bishop was his coach for the Montreal Québécois. I've heard many positive things about his experience with playing for Bishop, and I think, a coach who demanded a lot of hard work was exactly up his alley, and so I saw that he, in his scrapbook, kept sort of the meaning behind the artwork and about the artist, but also that it was this print was given to the Minto Cup sort of all-around athlete as the Jim Bishop Award. And so I do wonder whether that is part of the reason he selected this particular print. And I don't know how much he stayed in touch with Jim Bishop over the years, but what I do know is that when my brother was 15, 16 years old, and my dad took him to Ontario, watched some junior games, and his contact was Jim Bishop. So my brother met with him, watched some games, and they sort of made a plan for him to play in Ontario the next year. And so the next year when he went and played with the Green Gales, which is a junior B team, but the Green Gales was Jim Bishop's. I think he built and ran that team for many, many years. So similar to my dad playing for the Adnaks, the Green Gales was here's your opportunity to play junior B, increase the speed, increase the play of the game, and then the following year he was able to play junior A for Whitby Warriors, who when they first went up, Jim Bishop was the coach of that junior A Whitby Warriors team, who were winning Minto Cups annually. However, I believe he never did get to play for Jim Bishop. He passed away suddenly, right in that between his first and second year there.
Bill McBain of the Kelowna, BC Canadian Lacrosse Association coaching chair writes, and this is a quote, "I have never worked with an athlete, then or since, who has demonstrated the work ethic to lacrosse that Wayne has in a sport played primarily by amateurs." Rick Gautreau of Halifax, a member of Nova Scotia's Canada Games lacrosse team in 1973, says the first time he saw Wayne play was in 1969. Here's another quote. He says, "He was already the best player on the team, and he had just taken up the game. He played for a team called the Halifax Generals, and Wayne was a general on the floor." Rick calls Wayne a class player who dominated silently. After a game, you'd realize he had 3 goals, 6 assists, and stripped the ball from 4 guys. That was Wayne, the athlete.
Could you provide any perspective about the role that Wayne played with Dan's evolution, to being, I believe is the second Nova Scotian after your dad being the first to actually play in the NLL, and he had a good career. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, when we were growing up here, we played interlacrosse, was the program running, from longtime Nova Scotia volunteer that sort of has been around, I would say, with my dad through it all is Steve Brown. So I remember playing in Sackville. My brother and I played inter-lacrosse. And then at about Bantam, the boys switched to box and the girls were sort of done. So he played box lacrosse, but there would have only been a team or two in the province through that sort of 90s period. And they did, I think when he was maybe 14, they did, my dad took a group to Founders Cup in Junior B. And a lot of those guys are still playing in the senior loop. And so, but just wanted the next step for him, and always was sort of, they played at the schoolyard all the time. And I was talking to my brother the other night, and he said, you know, he always knew the next step. I didn't know he knew the next step, but I couldn't figure out why he was drilling the ball at me, passing and catching. But then when I went to Ontario, I realized like that pace of the play was so much faster, that lofty pass no longer works. And so, you know, he really had a huge impact on Dan's career, and not only sort of getting him to the point where he could play in Ontario, but also making those connections and setting the stage for him to be successful, and knowing that if he were ever to, you know, play further, that you had to play beyond Nova Scotia. And so Dan did end up playing, getting drafted by the Philadelphia Wings after a successful high school and university careers in the States. Played a couple seasons with Philadelphia and another with Edmonton.
What were some of the challenges you remember he may have had to face during those down years, and how did he kind of try to address those, or any comment on what it was like at that point?
The challenge he would have had where he was trying to get more players into the game was getting people to fill those spots that needed to be filled, you know, like the support people, assistant coaches, executive people, people to do promotions, what have you. And that's where Wayne, he never had a problem asking people, would they help out? So I would have to think that would be his biggest challenge, is to get others to do the kinds of things that he really didn't need to do if he was at this year doing some of the developmental stuff. Well, let the other people take care of the administrative stuff. And getting those people out to do that would have been a challenge. And actually, he asked me if I would take over the type program that he was doing for a number of years, and he was doing the developmental skills. So I think he was getting overrun with, you know, trying to get support for what was going on in the metro area. So he was running thin. So he called me up and said, Gary, would you do the type program? You and Christine being his sister. I said, yeah, I'll do it. That was in 2000, I think 11, and I did it for about 5 years. And then I was traveling a bit, so, and at 64 years old, a grandfather teaching those little types, which I loved. I loved it. I was a phys ed teacher. I was an elementary teacher, junior high, high school as well. But, you know, a grandfather teaching them how to run and how to pass, and I could do it. You know, I still had the game, but yeah. But Wayne needed support. He needed help, and that's where you got involved, and Julie supporting him as well. And that's where.
Even while he was learning the game and improving his ability, he coached minor lacrosse, taking a Pee Wee team to nationals in 1971. A year later, he led midget-age players to Ontario to play top competition. By the mid-1970s, he became coach of the senior men's teams with which he played. After he earned his physical education degree at Dal and started teaching in the Halifax system, Wayne coached junior high school teams.
Your role as president of Lacrosse Nova Scotia, you would have engaged with Wayne at different boardroom tables and the sort of the planning and some of the administrative areas. Any stories or anything that sticks with you in terms of his leadership?
Not really, but we're talking about the female junior program, And I do recall going to a CLA meeting one time, and he basically pulled me aside and said, "You need to make this happen." On no uncertain terms, like, or don't come back. And you know, like, I think I caught him as he was sort of like was doing a whole bunch of stuff, and so anytime I saw him sort of at places, he was almost like you know, the sober second thought and the sort of the reference point at the table. So I didn't see him a lot in some of those circumstances, but he knew what was going on, and you know, I think I don't know. I feel like he always loved to be on the floor. You know, and as opposed to at the admin side, and so, you know, that's the other part that I don't know that you know, we talked about really is that he also pulled in the other people to do that support, which is the harder thing, like, you know, the treasurers and the secretaries and the people to host the meetings and everything else. And it was almost like, if that's going, then I can focus on this program and I can just keep producing more athletes and players, right? So it was that was my sort of perspective with him. But I do remember going to Montreal he gave me the tug.
From 2000 on, was he sort of pretty successful in order to sort of pull away from the admin side, or not really? No, he still had to keep his elbow.
Yeah, he'd want to have his finger in what was going on. And there was great support. Donna Gogan, who she was, in the last 2 years I did the Tyke program, she was doing the coordinating, you know, getting the teams and registering, organizing the referees and all of that thing. That's what Wayne needed, so that Wayne could get on the floor. And we just talked about it. That's where he really wanted to be. Now, he knew if he didn't do some of the admin stuff, lacrosse would have slowly gone to the wayside, possibly, you know, like. But there were a lot of people that were coming to the game, parents, you know, because once your enrollments go up, then the parents are there. Well, then you go, you know, and then the people come out like yourself and others. They come forward and say, "Yeah, I can help you out," and that's how the game grows. And that's not just lacrosse; that's, you know, throughout. A little more challenging lacrosse with the game of lacrosse because the competition for other sport areas. You only have, like I said earlier, you only have so many bodies to go around, you know, to support all what's being offered in this province. So, anyway.
I think, like you said, it's almost like he was a step ahead. So that was my exposure. It was like every time I wasn't involved really with him a lot that way, but every time I got involved somewhere, I could see his fingerprint. So like even like field lacrosse, right? He, I think, was part of the Metro Minor Field Lacrosse, which then became the Nova Scotia Field Lacrosse League, which then, you know, I got involved with. But you know, he was there at the start, and then, you know, the stuff he did with the store, like he used to always support sort of the Garnet Night lacrosse tournament, and he knew that, you know, that was part of it. People need to have gear, people need to have shiny stuff. And
What was it? Tell us about the store. What was the store?
Do you know how the store started?
no,
The store is a funny story
The store,
because when they started the Metro Minor Lacrosse League, you know, he's very frugal, so you use all your hockey gear, but you needed rib pads and bicep pads. And he begged the local sports store to carry rib pads, bicep pads, not asking for the fancy stuff, but we need sticks, these, you know, the basics. And they're like, well, there's no lacrosse program. We don't want to carry, like, that's too much of a risk for us. So again, made some phone calls. Terry Rowland ran STX in Ontario, who I think was an opponent, perhaps in the NLL. And so he was selling at cost rib pads, bicep pads, sticks out of the back of the station wagon at the outdoor box or wherever he was to get kids on the floor to start this sport. Well, then the MMLL, you know, really took off, and guess who now wanted to sell sports equipment or lacrosse equipment was the local sports store. And they actually went to SDX and said, no, you can't sell to him anymore, because if you sell to him, we won't buy hockey gear from you. And so Terry said, so you don't need a store, you need a storefront.
And that,
I get a phone call at school. I'm away at Queen's, and they say, "We're opening a store. We need a name." And I'm like, "How long have we got?" A couple days. And they named it Adnak after the team in Coquitlam.
Exactly.
wow. And that,
Yeah.
that operated for a number of years.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I don't know the real finances behind that store, but if you ask my mom, I don't think they made much money. They donated a lot. They did a lot at cost, and they got people. You know, this was before the time of ordering online. You know, it wasn't. You need to have the equipment in the province in order to run programs, and that was the reason behind the store.
It's funny, I do remember him pulling up in the Staywag and setting up the tent and pulling out all the stuff and sort of setting up a little thing at the Spry Dome.
Yeah.
And all the rink rats running around, sort of checking out the new gear and T-shirts and everything else. It was just, again, maybe he was all ahead of us all. He knew that that was an important part of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit, and we talked about how humble your dad was, you know, obviously. But he did have some significant moments where he was recognized, you know.
Wayne has been a local referee since 2000, but became a Quebec certified referee in 1979 and has worked junior games at the national level. A national level 4 official, he refereed the gold medal game at the Founders Cup in 1986, the National Senior Championship.
He's kind of a renaissance guy. Early on, he was certainly a player and a professional player. Later on, a coach, an administrator, a sponsor, a businessman. He ran a lacrosse store here for many years. Now he's the elder statesman.
In the last 10 years, he has been instrumental in the rebirth of lacrosse in Nova Scotia. In 1998, there were only 100 kids playing in organized leagues. Now, there are close to 2,000 participants, 86 teams, and approximately 100 new coaches and referees. Perhaps his role as technical director of Lacrosse Nova Scotia, a position he's held since 1995, has had something to do with that. He's also been the organization's vice president and treasurer through the years, and since 1998 has been the Nova Scotia coaching representative for the Canadian Lacrosse Association. He's run clinics, evaluated players, coaches, and officials, assisted the Canadian Association in developing its current manuals and workbooks, has conducted coaching courses in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI, has been a referee assigner, league scheduler, headed and run a field lacrosse league, and organized and run a camp with his son Dan, who plays professional lacrosse now.
I think the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame was a huge one. It was an induction night that he attended, you know, annually prior to being inducted. So it was, you know, something that meant something to him. The induction night was a really wonderful, memorable moment where a lot of the lacrosse community, his coworkers from school, family, were there and really sort of celebrating the successes of his career, and not something that had been done a lot. So I think he was quite overwhelmed by that recognition. Yeah, and I think there might have been some diamond jubilees and some other plaques that were sort of hung in his office, but that was a big one. Yeah.
So of all the sports, Wayne, lacrosse got you early and kept you forever. What is it about that sport that you so love?
Well, it's when I started in 1969, I caught on to it very quickly and progressed really fast, and was able to represent the province at that 69 Summer Games. And I can remember, it's why you asked that, I can remember going down, some of the guys that are here tonight were teammates on the Generals. And I can remember going down to the first practice when they were just starting the 4-team league that particular summer. And I had been cut off a lot of teams earlier on. And I can remember going over to the coach and saying, "Coach, am I going to make this team? Because the baseball team is over there. I'll go over and play baseball." So the coach was Bill Bent, and he said, "No, you're going to play." So I stuck with that and sort of never looked back.
What about the transition that you made so beautifully as a player to a teacher and a coach, and what that's meant to your life?
Well, I always had an interest in and a desire to help youngsters. I started coaching Little League Baseball when I was 16, and it was something I always enjoyed. And I was fortunate enough to have some grants, government grants, to help me through university, and I was able to help during the summers of 72, 73, and one of the things I took on was the Midget Lobster Trap Tournament in 1973. And again, that was something that was very enjoyable, and it was something that originated from the hospitality that my midget team that I had in Ontario the year before, we wanted to sort of show the same hospitality that we received in Ontario, so I invited those teams back, and I was expecting a couple teams to come to that tournament that summer, and we ended up with 8. So it was very gratifying indeed.
Speaking of gratifying, what does it mean to you to see the recent rebirth, we gave the numbers, but the rebirth of this sport in this province?
Well, it's so gratifying. It's as most know, lacrosse was very popular in the early 70s, and then it tapered off, and late 80s, 90s, there was hardly anyone playing, and the end of the 90s, myself along with 3 others got together, and we wanted to see if we could get minor lacrosse going once again. And at that time, they were showing a lot of the professional games on TV, and it was getting a little bit of exposure, and it sort of took off, and it grew from there.
Yeah, from 100 to 2,000, you should be very proud, and we're certainly proud tonight of Wayne Finck, ladies and gentlemen. Congratulations to you.
I want to say that the lacrosse community, my school colleagues and former teammates, friends from afar, and especially my family, it's so nice to have them here tonight to share this evening with me. It's very special.
Thank you, sir.
I got one last thing.
Okay.
Oh God, what is this?
Tie up the nets.
No, that too. That was the other part of bringing stuff along. My son, one of my sons became pretty good at stringing sticks long before YouTube. He was just went with some of the older guys. They taught them out of Devonshire Arena, and he sort of got quite good at it. And I remember Wayne used to send sticks home with him from school. Again, back to the way he thought. He had the garbage can full of sticks that got used for tri-lacrosse and intramurals and everything else. And people needed a stick to get started, and then they'd go buy their own at a store. But I think the interesting thing was he understood how important it was for the lacrosse experience to be a good one by having a good pocket and shooting strings so that the ball would come out cleanly. And he would send home 5 or 6 sticks each night, and Cam would sort of go down and do his stuff, and he'd bring them back, and then he'd get some more and bring them back. And eventually he and Peggy would send him sort of work from the store for stringing sticks, but it all started this understanding of kind of how important it was for that first experience to be about having the right kind of stick. And the sticks themselves were nothing special. I mean, we used to joke that some of them were pretty old, but they worked. They always worked well.
Yeah, he would get frustrated if it didn't, because if a kid picks up a stick and it's got a big hook in it, and off the shelf, the sticks don't come strung well, so you do need to adjust them, fix them up, so that the kids trying a new sport have a chance of success. Yeah.
That success is critical. I'm situation came to mind. It doesn't involve Wayne, but I watched would have been in the early 70s, maybe a bantam team that was practicing, and they were doing shooting drills on the goalie, and they were running in player after player, and the goalie was about this high, the net's there. They just filled the net, and I thought, if you're going to teach this game, the kids have to have some element of success. I'm sure that goalies never played after that, excuse me. Yeah. But Wayne understood it, lived within the stick. So if you have success with your stick, you're going to still play with it. If your ball's not working, It may sit on a shelf. Yeah, so.
This is Dale McKenzie, and he played with Wayne on the Quebecois team. Wayne and I met at the Canada Games tournament in 1969 when I played for Ontario, and again as a teammate playing for the Montreal Quebecois. His maturity and his intensity stood out. He was a great teammate. John Ferguson called him the best blue-collar defensive player on the team because he wasn't afraid to get into the dirt when necessary, and he always did that without hesitation. A great competitor, and as others have already said, an even better person.
That's incredibly accurate description of Wayne. Blue collar guy, you know, he not flashy, nose to the grindstone, and if you're going to be part of his group, you better follow his way, and he demonstrated it day in, day out, you know.
Yeah, it didn't matter what group he was coaching, he was going to model and be for commitment, for hard work. He was going to model that day in, day out. When we were coaching the girls together, he says, "Oh, I don't know if I want to coach next year. I want to go camping." And I was like, "But you can go camping for a weekend in the middle of lacrosse season." "Nope, if I'm going to commit, I need to show my commitment. I'm going to be there every week. I'm going to be early. I'm going to be on the floor." And that, you know, his motto was that was going to slowly infiltrate the girls that we were coaching. They're going to see this. And there wasn't one set of sprints those girls did that he didn't do them as well. And he was in his 60s. And I will remember, you know, Haley Glazebrook being one of the faster girls. They would do, and I tried to participate as well, but we would do the, you know, here's period 1, here's period 2, period 3, oh, overtime today. And then he would have the girls, you guys select one player to compete against me, and we keep going as long as I win. And so the girls would all get rallied around their one player, and they'd switch players in and out until someone beat them, and big cheers, because then it was finally over.
He was a formidable opponent, and he's a very gentle guy as an administrator and as a person, and he brings that kind of tenacity to it. He just doesn't give up. He's committed to it, and it's a great game, and he likes to get other people involved in the great game, and he's done that. Wayne was one of those guys that was so passionate about the game. He kept at it. He kept having programs for the kids and coaching and running all kinds of programs, and he was one of those guys who just kept working at it through the whole decline of the game. And when it started to come back in the late 1990s, he was there. He'd been there. He didn't go anywhere.